Most people wake up already tired, not because they didn't sleep, but because their mind is crowded before their feet even touch the floor. There's an invisible checklist humming in the background. Messages to answer, goals to chase, improvements to make, habits to optimize, news to catch up on, money to earn, people to impress, problems to solve. It feels responsible. It feels ambitious. It feels like life. Yet quietly, beneath all that effort, a strange question lingers that few dare to ask. If doing more is supposed to make us happier, why do so many people feel worse the harder they try? Here's a thought that might stop you mid-scroll. What if happiness isn't something you reach by adding, but something you feel when you subtract? What if the fastest way to feel lighter, calmer, and more fulfilled is not through another upgrade, plan, or hustle, but through doing less chasing, less cluttering, less proving, less forcing? At first, this sounds almost irresponsible in a world that worships productivity. But curiosity grows when you notice how many people who appear to have it all still feel restless, anxious, or empty, while others with very little seem deeply content. What do they know that most of us have forgotten? Doing less doesn't mean giving up on life. It doesn't mean becoming lazy, passive, or unmotivated. It means becoming intentional. It means recognizing that your attention, energy, and time are not unlimited resources. Every yes costs you something, even if it's invisible. Every added commitment quietly steals space from rest, presence, and joy. Over time, life becomes so packed with obligations that there's no room left to actually experience it. Happiness gets postponed to a future moment when things finally slow down, except they never do. Pause for a moment and notice how often happiness is framed as a reward. Be happy after you succeed. Relax after you finish everything. Enjoy life once you become someone better. This mindset turns joy into a moving target, always just out of reach. Doing less flips that equation. It suggests that happiness isn't earned through exhaustion, but revealed through simplicity. When the noise quiets, what's left is often enough. Consider how much of modern life is driven by comparison. You're constantly exposed to other people's achievements, lifestyles, opinions, and highlights. Without realizing it, you begin adding things to your life, not because they matter to you, but because they seem expected. More goals, more possessions, more social obligations, more self-improvement projects. Each addition promises fulfillment, yet somehow increases pressure instead. Doing less starts with an uncomfortable but freeing realization. Much of what you're chasing was never truly yours to begin with. Here's something rarely discussed. The human nervous system was not designed for constant stimulation and endless choice. Every decision, every notification, every demand pulls on your mental bandwidth. Over time, this leads to chronic stress that feels normal because it's everywhere. You might not notice it until you experience a moment of true simplicity, an unhurried walk, a quiet morning, a conversation without distractions, and suddenly your body exhales. That relief is not laziness. It's your system recognizing safety. Doing less creates space, and space is where happiness hides. When your schedule isn't jammed, you're not rushing through moments just to survive the day. You taste your food. You listen more fully. You notice small pleasures that used to be drowned out by urgency. A simple, happy life isn't flashy, but it's deeply nourishing. It feeds you in ways accomplishment alone never can. Think about how children experience joy. They don't need packed calendars or constant entertainment. They can be absorbed for hours by something simple. That capacity doesn't disappear. It gets buried under expectations. As adults, we're taught that value comes from productivity, that rest must be justified, that doing nothing is a waste. But what if doing nothing is actually where you remember who you are without all the roles? Curiosity deepens when you ask yourself an honest question. How much of your daily effort actually improves your life, and how much merely maintains an image? Many people are exhausted from managing appearances, appearing successful, busy, capable, interesting. Doing less loosens the grip of that performance. It allows you to live more privately, more truthfully, and strangely, when you stop trying so hard to be impressive, you often become more at ease and more likable. There's a quiet power in not needing as much. When you need less validation, less stuff, less approval, less certainty, you become harder to control and easier to satisfy. Happiness becomes less fragile because it no longer depends on everything going right. Simple living teaches you that joy doesn't require perfect conditions. It thrives in ordinary moments when you're present enough to notice them. One of the most surprising effects of doing less is how it sharpens clarity. When your life is cluttered, every problem feels urgent and overwhelming. When you remove non-essential tasks and distractions, real priorities emerge naturally. You stop confusing busyness with importance. You begin to see which relationships truly matter, which work feels meaningful, which habits support your well-being. Simplicity doesn't limit you, it reveals you. There's also a deep emotional benefit to doing less that many people overlook. It reduces the constant sense of falling behind. When your expectations are high and endless, you're almost always failing at something. When you simplify, success becomes achievable in everyday ways. A good meal, a finished task, a calm evening. These small wins accumulate into a steady sense of contentment rather than brief spikes of excitement followed by exhaustion. Notice how much time is spent worrying about the future or replaying the past. Doing less brings you back to now, not because you force mindfulness, but because your life becomes manageable enough to actually inhabit. When there's less to juggle, your mind stops racing quite so much. Peace is not something you chase, it's what remains when you stop running. Some people resist simple living because they fear boredom. But boredom is often just the absence of distraction, not the absence of meaning. Beneath boredom lies creativity, reflection, and self-understanding. When you're no longer constantly entertained, your mind begins to wander in productive ways. Ideas surface, emotions get processed. You reconnect with parts of yourself that were drowned out by noise. Doing less also changes how you relate to time. Instead of slicing your day into frantic segments, time begins to stretch. Mornings feel gentler, evenings feel fuller. You stop measuring life by how much you've accomplished and start measuring it by how it feels. This shift alone can dramatically improve happiness because it aligns life with human rhythms rather than artificial deadlines. There's an unexpected freedom in letting go of the need to optimize everything. Not every habit needs tracking. Not every interest needs monetizing. Not every moment needs documenting. When you allow things to be imperfect and unproductive, you give yourself permission to be human. That permission is deeply calming. It softens the inner critic that tells you you're never doing enough. Relationships also benefit when you do less. When you're not constantly rushed or preoccupied, you show up more fully. You listen instead of waiting to respond. You choose depth over quantity. Fewer but more meaningful connections often bring more happiness than a wide network maintained through obligation. Simple living reminds you that love doesn't scale well, and that's okay. Financial stress is another area where doing less can transform well-being. When your lifestyle is simpler, your needs decrease. When your needs decrease, pressure eases. You're no longer trapped in a cycle of earning more just to sustain more. Money becomes a tool rather than a source of anxiety. Contentment grows when your life costs less to maintain, not just financially, but emotionally. There's a quiet confidence that emerges when you stop overloading your life. You trust yourself to know what's enough. You stop seeking permission to rest. You become less reactive to external expectations. This confidence isn't loud or performative, it's grounded. It shows up as calm, patience, and resilience. Happiness, rooted in simplicity, doesn't disappear when circumstances change because it isn't built on excess. The idea that doing less leads to happiness challenges deeply ingrained beliefs. It asks you to question what you've been taught about success, worth, and fulfillment. That questioning can feel uncomfortable, but it's also liberating. Once you realize that much of your stress is optional, you gain agency. You can choose differently. You can opt out of the race without quitting life. Imagine waking up with a day that isn't packed edge to edge. Imagine choosing what matters instead of reacting to everything that demands attention. Imagine having enough energy left at the end of the day to enjoy something small without guilt. This isn't a fantasy reserved for monks or minimalists. It's a series of small, intentional decisions to remove what drains you and protect what sustains you. Doing less doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual unlearning. You start by noticing what exhausts you without giving much back. You begin saying no without over-explaining. You simplify routines. You reduce inputs. Each small subtraction creates a little more breathing room. Over time, those pockets of space connect and life feels lighter. There's something almost rebellious about choosing contentment in a culture that profits from dissatisfaction. When you're happy with less, you're less easily manipulated by fear and desire. You stop believing that the next purchase, achievement, or milestone will finally fix everything. You recognize that happiness is not a destination, but a way of moving through the world. The most profound shift that comes from doing less is internal. You stop viewing yourself as a project that needs constant improvement. You start relating to yourself as a person worthy of care right now. This softening doesn't make you stagnant. It makes growth sustainable. Change that comes from self-acceptance lasts longer than change driven by self-criticism. If you're still watching, it might be because a part of you is tired, not just physically, but existentially, tired of striving without arriving, tired of carrying more than you can hold. That tiredness isn't a flaw. It's a signal. It's an invitation to experiment with another way of living. Try this simple curiosity experiment. What's one thing you could stop doing that wouldn't actually ruin your life? One obligation you could loosen. One expectation you could question. One habit you could simplify. Notice how it feels. Often, the relief is immediate and surprising. That feeling is your compass. Happiness doesn't need to be chased at full speed. Sometimes it's waiting quietly for you to slow down enough to notice it. Doing less clears the path. It removes the obstacles you unknowingly placed between yourself and a good life. And the more you practice simplicity, the more you realize that happiness was never missing. It was just buried under too much. In the end, the fastest way to feel happier isn't to add another goal or fix another flaw. It's to ask, gently and honestly, what can be let go? Because when life becomes simpler, joy doesn't have to fight for attention. It rises naturally, filling the space you finally allowed it to have. Remember this: you don't need to do more to become more. You don't need to chase everything to be happy. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to slow down, let go, and choose peace over pressure. Start doing less of what drains you and more of what makes you feel alive. Because happiness isn't found in busyness, it's found in simplicity. If this message resonated with you, subscribe for more reminders like this. Until next time, live simply, breathe deeply, and choose what truly matters.